say an enormous welcome to everybody, and to say welcome to our drawing discussion on drawing matter. The evening ahead drawing matter is the exhibition at Drawing Projects UK at the moment. It runs until the 31st of July. So we have the weekend to visit if people are in the vicinity and able to join. The session means that we're going to hear from the artists, so Eleanor Bartlett, Lucinda Burgess and Carole Pearson. And if everyone could mute, if we're not speaking, that would be perfect. And then we're going to hear from the curators of the exhibition, Fiona, Cassidy and Gary Sangster, and there will be opportunity for you to ask questions. So it's a very informal, formal session. And we are recording the event so that we can share the recording afterwards, or at least for our records. And I will now say what a fantastic opportunity it is to hear from the artists, to talk about the exhibition that we have on show at the moment, and to introduce you to Eleanor, Lucinda and Carole one by one, who all emphasize the nature and character of different kinds of matter, be it graphite, chalk, wax, tar, paper, wood or metal paint. They're all united by a limited colour palette, and frequent use of line, and the exhibition is an exploration into the expanded field of drawing and looking at the boundaries between sculpture, painting, architecture and drawing. All drawing matter as an exhibition, and our opportunity this evening is to hear from the artists about their proposal, which came to us through an open to draw proposal to Drawing Projects, and how their work feeds into the concept for the exhibition that they have, and to hear more about the show. So welcome everybody. It's fantastic to have so many people with us this evening. And I'm now going to hand over to Eleanor to introduce Eleanor Bartlett to you, who will be our speaker. So I think this is the point where you might want to have your view on speaker view so that you can see Eleanor as she talks to you a little bit about her work. And you'll need to forgive us. I'm driving the machine this evening. I'm driving the PowerPoint, so hopefully that won't be too clunky for everybody. So welcome, Eleanor.
Thank you, Anita. So I'm going to briefly describe what I do with reference to the slides to help you visualize how drawing and matter are fundamental to my practice. Both these things are completely integrated into what I do and how I think. The drawings are the starting point of my idea, and the rectangle within the rectangle is the key point which starts me thinking. These are rough drawings and they can keep going. Just ideas really of how the rectangle should be eased onto the support. The drawings usually stay in the studio, and the painting, which carries on from drawing with the matter. This drawing in particular probably will not make it, as I discovered by drawing that it was a drawing, not a painting. The line is so fine, as we've said, it blurs, but there is something to be got out of a drawing which can relate to painting. And if we keep going, these are still rough sketches playing with the idea of form on a rectangle, and just keep going. The next slide, I think. That's it, and keep going. So that just to give you this one, I'm always very seduced by the idea of a dark form. So this one will stay in my head, which is where the drawing then comes back to. The next one, next drawing, And this form is a repeated idea termed mater, matter, mater, mother, earth, mother. It's all related and very fundamental to, in fact, in a universal sense. These drawings probably won't make it to a painting, nor the next one, but they are dealing with the matter I use, which is tar. So next one, and then the next one, which is a painting, 200 by 130 centimeters on canvas, tar on metal paint, which is chosen to resist the seepage of tar. So all the time I'm in abeyance, if you like, to my materials, which really choose how to work. These forms bled out of initial sketches, and they squeeze themselves and push themselves almost to the edge. So I followed, and the next one, again, the bitumen really exercised its full right and nearly took up the whole canvas, just as I was going to obliterate it. So I am very much, in respect of my materials, in fact, the matter, I would say, has the power in the end to persuade, and the object, the canvas, with the tar is the work, with no inference or suggestion. It is the frontal physical manifestation of matter, with which, as I say, starts with drawing. So it all comes together, and the final slide, how am I doing? Have I overrun? The final slide, where the metal paint has now settled on the surface of the painting, and it may stay, and it gradually takes on a wonderful color as it burnished sort of cream as it melds with the bitumen. So really, this is a brief explanation of how crucial, in fact, how our roles are interchangeable in a non-hierarchical sense. When you're working with matter, you really have to be the matter. So that's my hasty run through. How's that, Anita? Is that okay?
Perfect. And actually, if I could only undo my screen, I think a really interesting, very concise introduction to the focus of the work and the focus of the work in the show, but also the underlying way that it's made and its relationship to drawing. So it's been really fascinating to have that short, sharp introduction to your practice and process and the relationship of painting and drawing. And I think the really important message that the materiality is intrinsic to its meaning and making. And I think that's a really powerful statement to make. We're going to take questions at the end of the session. So if people have thoughts and questions that they want to direct to Eleanor, please pop them in the chat so that we have a sense and we're able to come back to you so that you can ask those questions. And I'm going to say one enormous thank you to Eleanor for breaking the ice and moving us into the first part of the event, and to say thank you and welcome to Lucinda Burgess, the second of the three artists in the show, and who will now introduce us to her work and preoccupations within the context of the exhibition. So thank you, Eleanor, and welcome to Lucinda.
Thank you, Anita. So I'm going to talk about my work in relation to the pieces in the show. So starting with the first one, this is called Seeing Straight. It's very, very tall, 2.5 meters high, really good position in the gallery opposite the window, and a nice straight wall. So this was made in 2016. It's the first time that I've started to use paper in a sculptural way. So I've taken aspects of drawing like line, but I've folded the paper to create the line by the crease on the shadow. And other aspects of drawing I've taken being the glass, which is often used to protect drawing, and the fact that it's paper. But I'm taking those elements and wanting to create an object that really interacts with the viewer and the light in the room, so that it's highly interdependent and changes a lot as you move around it. As the glass is in front of the lines, as you look up, the lines start to go zigzag and distort. And as you look straight, the lines are straight. And then as you look down, the lines break up again. So seeing straight all depends on your point of view. And that's a theme that crops up in my work quite a lot. And on to the next piece of work, which is called In Conversation. That's just a small one that I'd made to show how it reflects the light. So this one's also in the show. It's called In Conversation, and it's all paper with polished graphite on top. And I folded the paper again. And as you walk around it, the tones change dramatically from black to almost bright white. And that's what I was after, that constant movement of the visual in the visual field of the viewer. There are pros and cons to framing. I wanted it to be interconnected with everything around it, and framing isolates it and separates it from its surroundings. But I reasoned that the glass on the frame also reflects a lot, and so it's in keeping with the main idea, and it was just practical. And then the next one, I made this to accompany it, and I was going to call them together conversation piece. That started because I noticed a red light on a car outside the window was creating a big red haze on the grey one that I've just been talking about. So I thought I'd make a red one to go with it, so that they talk to each other. So I'm taking the same material, red waxy pigment. I often choose a material and put it in different contexts, or in this case, on different planes of the paper. So it's the same red, but it keeps changing depending on where it is on the folded piece of paper. And again, I'm wanting to create links with the surroundings and the architecture, so that it's sort of part of the room. And this one's called Variations in Red. It's the same idea, but it's evolved and become more sculptural. Again, connecting to the architecture, in that it looks a little bit like a cornice, but it's the same red pigment looking very, very different in different parts of it. So it looks almost black in places. So in this one, the links to drawing are being a bit stretched, but it is linear and it's paper. And then from the side, you can see that I've started to use aluminium to hold it in place. And I've been doing that more since this piece. And then the next one, this one I called Territoire. So I've taken out the representational element of drawing, which is often thought of as being like a map. And this is more like the territory, the matter of drawing, and showing that the real character of paper and how fragile it is, and taking the element of line from drawing. And the thing I like about lines is that it has an element of time built into it, because lines travel from A to B, and therefore they take time, and we tend to think of time as being linear. And so I drew on the paper loads and loads of lines, and then I replicated the paper so that there are layers and layers. So I was trying to create a sense of endless time, I suppose. And I felt that the lines exaggerated the random character of the surface, which I always seem to get obsessed by different kinds of surface. So I'm sort of letting the natural material do what it naturally does. And then this black square series. So I wanted to make a black square that drew attention to the changeable quality of paper and the way it wears down with pressure and time. So in this one, you can see the way the paper has buckled and creased with the pressure of my pencil. And this one, I often talk about repetition and how you can't repeat. I often think of Heraclitus's saying that you can't step into the same river twice. So each time I did a square, it buckled differently, and the worn out paper reacted slightly differently. did this one in lockdown. It has a rather lockdown feel to it. Next one, and then this one was built up over time, and then this one probably reflects my disorientation during lockdown. And then the next one, this one I called Never the Same, because each block took time and it never was identical to the one before, and trying to get a sense of things carrying on ad infinitum. So you can see on the right the way the paper has buckled. So I'm wanting the natural material to do what it naturally does. And then finally, this one's called Highs and Lows, and this was the perfect place for it because it's in the gallery loo. And so we've got normal loo rolls sitting on top of the loo that are not covered in graphite, and then we've got these ones that are sort of on a shelf in a special place and covered in graphite. So I just enjoy the way perceptions of the same thing can change dramatically when the context changes. So the ones that are low are kind of got a bit lowly, and the ones that are high sort of gain more status. And it's all of these things keep shifting around our perceptions of the thing and keep changing. And I always like cylinders too, because they look so different. So from looking down on them, they look like circles, and looking straight at them, they look like oblongs. So it's this idea of change and flux and everything being highly interconnected. So that's what keeps coming through. So thank you for listening. That's
Thank you, Lucinda. A really great introduction and a really interesting insight actually in terms of the making of the work, and actually particularly the time that it was made in as well, which may be something we want to come back to in a discussion. But thank you very much. I'm going to move us on now to meet Carole Pearson, who's the third artist in the exhibition. So thank you, Lucinda, and welcome to Carole. And brilliant, fantastic. As you pop onto the screen, and I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Anita, and hello to friends and family and new faces. Yeah, I'm just going to talk about some of the work that's in the exhibition. I made new work during lockdown, which is here, and then the next slide shows work that I made for the exhibition that the three of us had in London in 2019, also called Drawing Matter. And for that exhibition, I was thinking about objects for drawing. Here we've got drawing brush and rubbing brush, which sort of work together as a pair. And I was making objects that were not necessarily that I was going to use for drawing, but they had the potential for drawing. And they were all based on the idea of the everyday and transforming the everyday with drawing implements. So here we have drawing broom, and they are, I'm showing them as with some one drawing that I made from the drawing brush, which is on the next slide. And from this piece of work, I did a series, and the quality of the line became really interesting. And it was the start of a new set of work called Field Series. The first image was one of those. And these are blackboards. I think we can see the next slide. And I don't know, I think I had an emotional response to blackboards, you know, the idea of the chalk, the object of the chalk, the object of the blackboard, and there's something particularly reminiscent of, you know, layers and layers of lines that are kind of information, communicating ideas. and I think they particularly, I saw an exhibition of Joseph Beuys in Berlin in about 2012 that was a room with all his blackboards around the floor, sort of propped up, and I had a kind of quite a strong emotional response to these. So tying together the idea of the blackboard as an object to draw on, and during lockdown I had some wonderful walks with friends, and I became aware of the fields and how I could see those as being giant areas for drawing on, you know, the tractor, the plough, all like drawing tools, and these works became kind of representations, I suppose, of those parallel lines. And I made myself drawing implements and rubbing implements, but this time I didn't feel that I wanted to show the objects. They became, you know, sort of no-go area for the public, and the boards themselves became my objects, and showing them in this way, they kind of bridge the gap between the wall and the floor, you know, the floor being traditionally a sculpture space, the wall being a 2D space. I think in terms of drawing matter, you know, the idea that something can travel between sculpture and two-dimensional objects is where I'm sort of pushing at the moment. And here we see the broom also bridging the wall and the floor, sort of kind of tempting us to think that it's a normal broom, but as you approach, you are kind of surprised by the possibility of it being a drawing object. I think I might have got to my 5 minutes, but there are some more images. What do you think, Gary or Anita? Anyone there?
I'm here, keep going. Keep going. Keep going.
The way that I've displayed these, oh, sorry, that last one, these objects is kind of, you know, the idea of the vitrine being something that we might see in the museum. I'm kind of looking back at, you know, past job that I had in a museum archive, and you know, the fascination of the way that we view objects and relics. And then I think in the next image there is, I probably haven't got time at the moment to talk about these, but the these black what are they called? I'm just going to get the title of those. So my brain's gone dead. Untitled wax impressions. These a set of works that are all new to the exhibition, that are, again, they're sort of using wax as a sculptural object and then wax on paper as a sort of drawing matter. And oh yes, there's one. That is, that might be the end of my. Sorry, I'm not very good at this.
There you go.
There, yeah.
Brilliant. That's really fantastic. They're fabulous set of work, and really fantastic to hear you talk about the relationship between making material and making materials and implements to draw with. So Carole, thank you so much for sharing that with us. And I'm going to now invite Fiona Cassidy, who's worked with you in terms of the curation, and Gary Sangster from Drawing Projects UK, just to say a little bit more about the exhibition and how they worked with you to present it at Drawing Projects UK, which, as you know, is not a white cube space. So Fiona, I wondered if you'd like to join us first, and then once Gary and Fiona have spoken, we'll take the slideshow down so that we can ask questions and the audience can join us.
Thank you. This was a wonderful opportunity to get involved with this. I've known Eleanor and Lucinda and Carole for quite a while now, and shown work in various exhibitions, but never the three of them together. And so I was really pleased to be asked to help kind of bring this show to the end point. I got involved quite late, only really a few months ago. And from a fairly practical point of view, my background has come through a fine art route rather than an art history route. So when I'm curating, I'm very much thinking about the objects in space and making sure they relate well to each other. I don't think I've ever worked in a white cube. I've worked in lots of different spaces, but they've always been old buildings. So they've always got some peculiarities about them that affect the placing of the work. So it was kind of, I was thinking afterwards, this is one of the most truly collaborative experiences I've had actually working with artists, because everybody, the three artists make very different work, and their working process is quite different, but all were very generous in coming to this wanting to make a show that worked really well for everybody's work. And we established quite early on that we didn't want three separate shows. It was very much about making all the work integrate together, and we just sort of quietly worked through which work, that the space tells you that some things have to go somewhere. Having Lucinda's big red piece right in front of the front door was really key. We needed powerful pieces in various places and quieter pieces in others, and that was kind of it. Yeah, it was a process that just flowed really well. And Gary came in and made a few tweaks quite near the end that just suddenly made everything work even better. It was really great. Gary, do you want to add something to that? Go, Gary.
Oh, okay. Well, I would just say that I'd like to thank the artists and Fiona for working on this project, because I think it's a really, it's a beautiful project in many ways. And I would regard it as a self-curated show, that the artists really sort of developed the idea and developed the dialogue together, and invited Fiona really to assist in producing the exhibition, which they had conceived. And I think that was done in a really elegant fashion. My role was really just to provide some advice about how our awkward and unusual spaces at Drawing Projects UK at Bridge House might work in relationship to this particular body of work. So one of the things I wanted to say, though, about listening to the presentations today, how important it is to think about the idea of time. I think Lucinda and Eleanor and Carole all mentioned this idea, and I think it's absolutely critical, because we so often get obsessed with the artifacts, with the objects, with the images, and yet they're merely just traces of the process that the artist has gone through. The thinking process, the selection process, the making process, the discarding process, the editing process. All of these things are a compact of time in a way, and in order to come up with these artifacts which reflect on the practice of the artist. And what the exhibition does is bring back into play that idea of time as people spend time looking at the exhibition and moving through particular spaces, thinking about how work is juxtaposed, and ultimately what those juxtapositions might mean, both in terms of the making of the work and possibly more important in terms of the practice of the artists who are making those things. So I thank you to the artists indeed for, I think, those very succinct and well thought out presentations. And thanks for doing such an extraordinary job of bringing this exhibition together, which I think is, you know, I like to say this about our program at Drawing Projects, is another world-class project. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Thanks, Fiona, and thanks, Gary. I'm going to stop sharing the screen so that we can see our guests. And I think it's been really fantastic to hear those reflections on how both Drawing Projects, but you as curators, work with the artists. And also to reflect on actually how much this has been a collaborative project and exhibition. So a huge thank you. I'm going to stop sharing the screen and then we'll be able to take questions from the audience. And we do have a number of them, which is great. So once I've got my controls back in a moment, it will be great to ask those questions, and I have lost my controls briefly, so apologies. We have a question from James as the very first question for Eleanor. So James, I don't know if you're there and you want to ask your question, or I can ask it for you and we'll hear the response. So if you're speaking, please do pop your microphones on, and if not, do keep them muted. The question for Eleanor is around working with such glutinous materials, which is a lovely description for them. And the question is about how you store and preserve your work. Do you use anything to help speed up the drying process, or anything to stop things sticking to it? It's very much a question about materiality. Over to you, Eleanor. You need to come on off mute. Can we do it?
Is that better?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes, from your question, I'm wondering whether you've had the experience of working with these materials as well, because these are definitely concerns. The drying process is very tedious and can take up to years. Yes, they stick together, so you do have to take precautions. It's a very messy, sticky material, but that's why I like it, because it's so difficult. You have to find a way around it, and eventually you work with it and it pays you back. So yes, you have to take these characteristics well into consideration. It's all part of what you're doing when you use this kind of matter. Yes, it's not easy. What was it? Was there another bit of the question, or is that about the...
I'm not sure if you fully answered the question, but I think you have talked very much about the practicalities of working with the materials you have. So unless James wants to come back with anything else, or anyone else, let's move on to the next question. And the next question comes from Nick Grelier. I don't know if you want to come on and ask your question, Nick. Shall I ask them?
You ask it, Anita.
You're there.
Oh, I am. Okay, I'll ask it. Actually, I'm not, I was just, it was more of a sort of comment that I wrote down when I was listening to all of you, was just that there's such a kind of balance of control over and being controlled by, and surrendering to your materials. And I just wondered if you could sort of, I don't know if you felt like talking about that at all, or whether I've got that wrong, but it just felt like, yeah, it was sort of like real control and real letting go. Anyway, anyone?
Yeah.
Take that.
Can I say something?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
I think that's a very core thing in my practice. I think that's a really good point, because I'm trying to sort of bring out the uncontrollable natural material by being very, by using line, which is sort of controlled, isn't it? Line is very controlled. I often use a ruler. But the aim is to try to accentuate the natural and the wearing down of material, and the way accentuate the way it's chaotic and does its own thing. I often use handmade materials which are more natural and have sort of weird bumps and lumps and strange surfaces, but the lines bring that out. So it is a sort of mix of control and not control in that way, for me anyway. I don't know what, Carole, you think about that?
I think I often choose materials that are either really fragile, so will break easily, and this time with the chalk, I definitely, to begin with, it just kept disappearing, and especially, if you spray it to fix it, suddenly the whole day's work has gone. So there's definitely a struggle and a kind of flirtation with material that you're having to get to know it, and it gets to know you, and just that sort of pull and shove of seeing whether there's going to be a future in your relationship. And I think that is really, why I love working with materials that are both changeable and not always obvious. And I think Eleanor's definitely in the control, surrender patch, aren't you?
Can I ask one quick more question that's related to that, which actually Eleanor did speak about at the beginning, was the shape of the rectangle, and a lot of the work that you're all doing uses its sort of substrate is a sort of paper shaped, whether that's your blackboard or whether it's Lucinda's sheets, which are sheets but then they're folded, and it's sort of that to me was quite a lot of part of the control of it, was that it wasn't that was the way of keeping control of it, maybe of things being in the rectangle. And then obviously anyway, I'm waffling, I'll be quiet.
Really great point to make. And Eleanor, do you want to come in and
well, the rectangle is very interesting. It has a very elegant dimensions, and it is, I always think of it as having an emotional value as well. So it is it's definitely part of the considerations when you're making an image or even not making an image. This rectangle, it has boundaries, but you don't have to be confined to the boundaries. The boundaries help set the image or not. Often my paintings bleed off the edge into a kind of infinite void. So it does not have to strangle a painting. You don't have to remain within the boundaries. It is a support, and it's key to whatever you're making. And sometimes restrictions actually are quite good to work with. But it doesn't mean I don't see it as a control. It is just, it's another way of building the object on a rectangular support. It's quite a complex idea. It's an interesting question, but the rectangle is definitely quite an amazing dimension. I do agree. Sorry, that's a very muddled answer.
It's a really clear and beautiful answer, so thank you, Eleanor. I'm following on from that. This is actually to Carole, but I think it relates really beautifully, is Angela, who's saying that one of the things she enjoys about the work is a sense of playfulness and mischief. And how important is that while you're creating your work? Or is it just the way you roll? There's something here about how do you respond to materials and ideas in making.
Yes, I think I'm often trying to amuse myself, and you know, the drawing brushes and brooms are definitely sort of, I suppose, slightly surreal objects in a way that, you know, that I might, or you know, making a hairbrush out of pencils, you know, I suppose they're kind of connected with function and playing around with function. So I suppose that's where playfulness comes in that way. And then maybe, you know, the blackboards that I've been making, imagining myself driving around fields that I know. So in a way, you know, again, kind of the playfulness is an imagined function. But thank you for picking up on that, Angela. That's nice.
That's great, thank you. And then following on from the other questions, again, one for Lucinda at this point, maybe to start there. But you mentioned the issue of frames. It's from Carolyn Black, who I know is here and may want to follow on, but I'll ask the question initially. Lucinda mentioned the issue of frames can separate the work from the space. And as Carolyn says, that's something she battles with. Could any of you speak a bit more about that relationship of framing? And in fact, it's probably mostly to Lucinda and perhaps to Carole, and perhaps why not to Eleanor. Lucinda, would you like to start?
So I've got those two red waxy pigment works in the show. One's framed and one isn't. And yeah, I think the one that's framed, it's not sort of fully functioning really like the sculptural one. I feel that it needs to interact with the light, and which the framed one does, but it's all about that interaction with the viewer and with the light, and the frame does go against that slightly. I was just in a sort of slightly practical mode at the time and pleasing galleries, and it's you know, it's more commercial. But then I ditched the frame and I haven't been framing since. Carole made an interesting point about the framed one. She said it looks more like a relic, which hadn't really occurred to me, but that she felt was the effect of the frame. It makes it more like a preserved ancient tatty old piece of paper, or whatever you might find in a museum that's been carefully preserved. And that's an interesting observation and characteristic that it hadn't occurred to me. But the framed works that I've got, the drawings, I think that this frame in those cases makes the drawings more precious and more, you just sort of, you're drawn up to it, and it's like a little object that you look into. So I like the frame in that context, and it's protecting the drawing obviously as well. But yes, it all depends on what you're making. So the one in the entrance, definitely. I did put it in a frame. In fact, I put it in a big boxy frame, and it looked like Dracula's coffin, or you know, it just looked horrendously scary because this was red in this sort of coffin-like box. So I got rid of that and found the aluminium and made more of the aluminium and put it on the wall as it is.
Thing about the transformation of the surface that somehow you have a different relationship to through the reflective frame. So citing those two is actually really interesting, thought-provoking prospect. And there's a question we'll come to in a minute around sculpture and drawing, but Carole, do you have thoughts? Because you obviously came from a museum background, and the way that you've used framing, particularly within this show, is partly about a sense of museum presentation. Yes, it is. The frames that I've had made are, acrylic boxes that I rubbed up against it when I worked at the V&A, and they were used as temporary frames for bringing objects out as a protector, not as an enhancer in any way. So they could be, on the wall for objects or as a case. And I've used them in both situations for my work here. And somehow it sort of suits me in that it makes everything become an object. A piece of paper is an object, and I like that. I think that's helpful, and I think in terms, sometimes it's right that the work is separated from the space and becomes more object-like or becomes preserved, and of course works on paper do need protection at various times. So, I do think, certainly if they're touring or travelling and in various contexts. So I think it's always a really challenging question about the presentation of drawing and works on paper, but I think these have been really interesting solutions and prospects which have kept their integrity to the work. So I think really interesting to hear. I don't know, Eleanor, if you want to come in.
What the question of framing? Really, I think that what framing does, which is quite interesting, is completely focus the attention on the drawing as an isolated object in itself. So many things are badly framed that they don't do the drawing any. You have to be very careful, but somehow it does isolate the work and give it more status as a work. Although, having said that, other works on paper work without frames. You have to select according to the drawing, really. I think you can't make sweeping decisions.
I think it's about being the integrity to the work and where it's and how it's to be presented. And,
yeah.
You don't have anything.
Can I just say something from a museological point of view? I think what Carole said is really important, that artworks, even if they're flat, two-dimensional things, are objects. And there's an incredible difference between making work in the studio and completing it, and then exhibiting it, where the public space becomes a dynamic interaction with the work. The work becomes part of a larger visceral experience. And so the work never exists in isolation. It exists as an object within the theatre of the museum or the gallery. And white walls are part of that theatre, and lighting is part of that theatre, and framing or non-framing is part of that theatre, and the time factor of how long people spend in front of the work looking at it, and whether they look at every square inch of it or just the overall picture or object. These are different practices, and artists and curators are in a dialogue about those practices, and the object becomes part of that dialogue towards meaning or understanding. So it's worth thinking about the differences between making the object, having the object or image, what it means to you as an artist and what you're trying to get it to say to the audience, and then how that changes when it enters the exhibition space or the public sphere. and interacts with audiences, and what devices are attached to it in various ways, and how those devices change the meaning of the work as well.
Perfect, thank you. And a really thought-provoking, really interesting commentary. We've got one last question, which is from Joe, who enjoys how the works blur the line between drawing and sculpture, and says that seeing the work out in the space, has it given you ideas of where you might want to take it next? And I think that's a perfect last question, unless anything else pops in to each of you. So I wonder if you want to go in turn to answer that question. Who's going to go first?
Well, I think
Carole.
I'll go first. I think I've just an immediate reaction was to make objects that I, rather than being on a board, you know, a flat surface, I came home and painted everything black and started, you know, drawing over whole objects. So at the moment, I'm kind of just taking drawing onto sculpture, and it's you know, there's a test ground there. Nothing ready to show yet, but it's definitely provoked a new journey.
Oh, thank you. Lucinda?
Well, at the moment, it's a continuation, really. I realise how important it is for me to play with very long, thin things, because I'm so keen on things changing as you walk around it. And so I'm making a very long, thin zigzag piece, which goes from sort of floor to ceiling, and creating more shine as well, so that it changes dramatically, and making more of the aluminium. So it's always a very sort of slight evolution from what came before, in my case.
Thank you.
It's sculpture, drawing, painting, all mixed up, really.
And Eleanor?
Well, the same. The struggle goes on, and you're always working towards this area of purity and simplicity, which says everything, and you just make mistakes all the time. But it's about carrying on with your idea, sticking to your idea and making it work, so it doesn't change in that respect.
Thank you. And of course, seeing the work in context, you always have a response to that relationship, and it's a discussion, a dialogue that you've all talked about throughout the conversation, which I think is something that's that conversation through material, through practice, and through thinking, through making. We are at 5 to 7, and we should conclude at 5 to 7. I wanted to say the most enormous thank you to everybody, to everyone for joining us, to the artists who have given us such a generous and insightful introduction to their work, as well as a fabulous, as Gary said, world-class exhibition at Drawing Projects UK. And thank you to Fiona and to Gary for joining us to situate that whole relationship of exhibition making in the context of drawing matter, and to have this fantastically generous conversation. It's been a real joy for us to work with you as 3 artists. As I said, you came to us through an open to draw proposal. We do have an open proposal, but we have also worked with all 3 of you before in different contexts at Drawing Projects, and also with Fiona as a guest curator. It's been a really fabulous session. You'll see from the chat a fantastic number of thank yous, and also a couple of extremely positive recommendations, recommending that people do visit the exhibition. If you are in the area and are able to join us, the exhibition is open till Saturday, and we'll be here to welcome you, to talk you through the show and to share with you the other fantastic parts of the exhibition, which include this wonderful exhibition leaflet, which is beautifully designed and organised by the artist, but also has a fantastic essay by Debbie Hillyerd, who's Director of Education at Hauser Wirth. So I'd like to say an enormous thank you. Congratulations to the three artists, to Eleanor, to Carole, and to Lucinda for a fantastic exhibition and for a fabulous drawing discussion. It's always a joy to host these, and it's always a joy to see how many people join us and are engaged with this programme. So can I say thank you? Anyone wants to say one last thing? You can, there's a moment or two before we close the doors to say thank you, and it's great to see so many people on screen, engaged and happily listening to a fabulous drawing discussion this evening. Lots of fantastic commentary, and it's really great to see you all here. We look forward to welcoming you again soon. For those of you who joined the Girl Friday Breakfast Club, there's an event on Friday morning at 8:30 with Yvonne Crossley, Director of the Drawing Gallery, and we'll look forward to sharing our programmes in the future, and also to sharing news about Drawing Matter and what happens next for Carole, Lucinda and Eleanor. Thank you very much and good night. See you all soon, I'm sure.
Thank you.
We should do a clap. Do this online in a meeting. Congratulations and thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anita and Gary.
Thank
Yes,
you for
exactly.
brilliant, generous, insightful conversation and discussion.
Thank you,
everyone, for coming.
Thank you.
lovely exhibition, great chat.
Brilliant. Thank you, Liz.